Well, welcome everybody. It's hard to believe it's November and we're once again meeting for another Islington Reads. It's fabulous. It's our 8th meeting and it's just wonderful to have seen Islington Reads continue to grow. I see a lot of familiar faces in the audience, and I'm also seeing a couple first timers by the looks of things. So welcome everyone. Islington Reads, as everyone knows, is a community book club. It is a partnership between Islington United Church and a novel spot bookshop, and all ages, genders, and identities are welcome. So we are very, very thrilled to have everybody here with us tonight. Also wanted to say we're delighted to have Cedar here with us. She's all the way from British Columbia. So we've had authors from all over the world, and today we've got one coming in from the West Coast. So we're delighted to have you here, Cedar, with us tonight. I'd also like to thank Penguin Random House and McClelland & Stewart, and particularly Ruda, who is Cedar's publicist, for facilitating us having Cedar with us tonight to discuss this absolutely fantastic book, Astra. So Astra, as I think all of you know, was longlisted for the Giller Prize. Unfortunately, it did not make it to the shortlist. Personally, and everyone on staff and everyone I think who's read it really thinks it should have made it to the shortlist, because it is a very, very special book, very thought-provoking, great characters, and really gorgeous writing. So we are thrilled, Cedar, to have you in our midst tonight and to hear you talk about Astra and your writing process and anything else you want to share with us this evening. Now, Astra was born in Vancouver, and she moved to Galliano Island when she was 8 years old. She spends part of her time in Galliano, and then the rest of the year she spends it in Victoria. She moved to Galliano when she was 8, and her parents, I guess, had bought a piece of land. And while they were clearing it out, they lived in tents for a period of time until their cabin was constructed. So definitely, Cedar has an absolute love for Galliano Island and sort of living in the smaller environment and out in nature. She went to school there. She also went to, sorry, I'm getting a little confused here. She went to preschool and elementary school in Galliano Island. And then from there, she moved to middle school on Main Island. And then after that, for high school, she went to Salt Springs Island. So she certainly knows all the islands in and around there. After she graduated high school, she went on to work in various retail establishments. She also worked in the visual arts. She worked in libraries as well as in a bookstore. So she knows what it's like to work in an independent bookstore, which is lovely. And then eventually, after she married and had her second child, she found the courage to write. So something she's always loved, storytelling, and she's always loved a good story and reading books, but it wasn't until she was a little bit older in life that she decided to take on writing. And Astra, as I've said to you, it is her debut novel. It's the first book she has ever written, and we're hoping there's going to be more books in the work, because we do think you're a very, very talented writer. And prior to writing Astra, Cedar also wrote articles or short fiction for 2 magazines, the Tattle Creek magazine, as well as Joyland. Anyway, I just wanted to give you a little bit of background information as to where Cedar comes from and her upbringing, and just a little bit of background before we actually move over to hearing Cedar talk about Astra and the writing process. So I guess without further ado, I will get Cedar to join us, and she's going to speak for about 20 minutes. I think there's going to be a little chat, or she's going to read her favorite passage from Astra. So it'll be neat to hear an author read in the voice. I don't know which character, and I don't know what section you're going to be reading from, but I'll be very interested to hear the voice that you use when you're reading that particular character. So, and then after about 20 minutes, 20 minutes, we're going to open up to the Q&A from the pre-submitted questions that we have received. And if we get through all of those questions, and there are quite a few, we will then proceed to potentially open it up for questions to come into the chat. But we'll get through the questions that have been pre-submitted first. So Astra, welcome all the way from Victoria. I'm assuming it's Victoria today, not Galliano Island. So welcome to Islington Reads.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Sarah, for such a fun introduction. I've never been introduced with a bit of my life story, so that was pretty fun to kind of hear it coming back. Um, since Astra is my debut novel, I am just starting to get used to talking about it and talking about my work and talking about myself. And I've never before been given a space of time to just kind of discuss. So we'll see how this goes. You'll have my first ever 20-minute talk before we get into questions. So that's pretty fun. As you said in your introduction, I think the only way to start talking about Astra is to talk a little bit about how I started writing, because there are some novels that are deeply researched and some that are more kind of just inspired from what you've kind of been taking in your entire life. And Astra is definitely the latter. So I will talk a little bit about how I started writing. Then I will go into some themes that I've been thinking about while writing Astra. And yes, then I will read a little tiny bit. But yeah, so one of the things that I've loved very much since chatting with people is joining book clubs. I hadn't even thought about this before I started coming out with Astra, and but talking to book clubs, joining people in their living rooms, and talking about Astra as if it's a book I didn't write, and I'm just with friends, and we're just talking about the different characters, and listening to who people couldn't stand, who they were frustrated by, who they loved, has been an incredible joy, because the responses are so different. Some people will connect with one character over another character, so that has been an incredible joy. So I'm looking forward to doing it again this evening. But yes, I am a self-identified late bloomer. And if that is something I share with Astra, maybe a little bit, I kind of drifted around after in my late teen years and early 20s. Like Astra, I left home and I moved to Calgary, and I got a job in a mall, uh, working in a men's clothing store. So that is one geographical similarity that I have with Astra. And though those chapters are completely fictional, I loved drawing on that major culture shock from small island pre-internet to suburban mall. So that's one thing I share with her as well. But I, even in my teens and 20s, I knew I would be a late bloomer. All I wanted to be was 35, because I thought at 35, life would really start. And that's when you would have the courage and the bravery to start doing what it is you wanted to do. And there's so many, of course, amazing Canadian women authors who are late bloomers or didn't publish their first literary fiction or whatever until they were in their 40s, 50s, and 60s. I'm especially thinking of Michelle Good, Mary Lawson, and Alice Munro, of course, the three people who I am very, very fond of. But yeah, so after working in retail and all those sorts of things, I did start working in the visual arts, which for a long time was a wonderful pairing for me because I loved to read. But during the day, while working for various artists, I kind of contracted myself out for welders and sculptors and fabric artists, muralists, and I would go into their studios and kind of do their menial labor. I got to listen to audiobooks and radio documentaries and This American Life and be immersed in storytelling, even during the day. And I got to meet a lot of very interesting and creative people in a different sort of sort. So after that, I decided I wanted to work a little bit closer with books. I kind of was creeping towards books, and I got a job first. I lived in Victoria for a while, and I got a job at the Victoria Public Library. And then I returned to Vancouver and worked at bookstores and libraries there as well. And it wasn't until I was 32 and I'd had my second kid and I was nearing 35. So I knew life was really about to start. And I thought very hard about what I wanted to do next. What could I be? What would be the next 20 years of my life? What were they going to look like? And I kept returning to this sort of one image, which was being around 80 and looking back. And I knew that if I hadn't tried to write, I would have a lot of regrets. And so I was sort of in a really, I saw a great opportunity. I knew from our family situation right at that moment, I would be the one who was kind of at home a bit more with the kids for a little while. And so I knew there I would be able to find some time and I could take some risks. And so I started to write, but only just for me. As a child, I was not good at school. I also was especially struggled with grammar and spelling and all things structural to do with writing. So it wasn't like, I didn't feel like the thing I was supposed to do, but it was the thing I wanted to try anyway. So I decided I was going to write a manuscript, even if nobody ever read it and it never left my drawer, and then I'd be happy at 80. That was my kind of start. So I started with one short story that was about a man who lived on a commune, who had a woman up the hill living in the communal house who didn't want to, who was having his baby and he didn't want to have anything to do with it. But this story was much different than the first chapter of Astra, though you can see the similarities. He was decided to get very high on magic mushrooms and lay on a bridge and just think about how he didn't want to be a dad for the entire story. So the story was quite dull and boring, but I got to the end and it was my first story and I was very proud of myself. And then so I started a second story that was about two teenagers, and there was a boy named Freedom who was sort of following around a girl named Astra. And partway through writing that story, I realized that this girl was the daughter of the man on the bridge. And so then I paused and I threw all that away because it was terrible. And I started to think about this idea as a novel, about writing about kids who came, or a child who came from this sort of beginning, counterculture, a little bit more of a neglectful parenting. And I was such a fan of books or novels that are loosely linked around a place or a theme, or a person, like Olive Kitteridge, one of my all-time favorite books, where you got a sense of her as a full person by hearing from her on occasion, but mostly hearing from her loved ones and her community. And then you got such a complex view of this very kind of difficult and frustrated, but deeply sad and trying woman. So I love that book. Early Cusk, the Lucky Ones, which it reads like short stories, but at a certain point you realize that people are all in the same family. Arlington Park, where there's a park in the center, and the park actually has its own chapters that are kind of setting the mood, and all the families live around the park. So it's how it ties everybody together. And one last one that I read over and over while writing was Plain Song by Kent Harroff, where the town and the place become a character of their own. So I loved that I'd started Astra, which I was now thinking of it as a novel, by looking at this one person through other people's eyes. And I decided that she would be the tie that bound everybody together, so that I could write little stories where they'd be linked by her walking into these people's lives and creating change. And then at the same time, you'd be building a larger narrative at the same time about this one person. Because I had this deep-seated and sort of naive belief that there could be a novel about anybody on this planet. It didn't matter how quiet or small your life was. If you found a collection of people, you could make anybody's life interesting. Everybody's life was interesting if you found the right people to tell their story. So Astra wasn't going to be that dramatic, or that her life wasn't that intense or anything, but it would become interesting because we'd see how she affected others. So that was sort of how I came to the idea of Astra. And then of course there were themes I wanted to explore, like Astra's directionlessness was one that I loved. And that's where I felt a little bit similar to her. I wanted her to be able to walk through life, taking risks, moving to new houses, trying new jobs, trying on new hairstyles and new people, and kind of meander through the novel. And I think that children born in kind of the similar environment that she grew up in often are a little directionless. And I grew up with quite a few kids like that who had been free-range parented from the very beginning and kind of had to figure all that stuff out on their own. Um, she, her father, Raymond, as I think you all know, didn't really believe in giving people advice. He didn't believe in telling people what sort of life they should lead. He liked to throw all of this to the cosmos and to the stars. And he was definitely not going to tell his daughter what to do. He sort of was parenting her through osmosis in a way. And the sad part there is, of course, I think all children crave direction. They all want their parents to tell them what to do, who they should be, what their potential is, where they think they should go. And even if the child disagrees with their parents in the end, even if they want to take an entirely different path, that direction meant that they were, that push that their parents gave them something to stand, would give them something to stand on, and would make them feel like they had a future and potential and they had somewhere to go. But Astra never had that because her mother had passed away during childbirth, and then because her father wouldn't give it to her. So when she leaves, she's still looking for that from out of other people. And that was a big theme that I wanted to kind of have her do that each chapter, where she is hoping that she'll find somebody who will finally tell her her potential, tell her who she should be, tell her what she should do. And she kept finding those people who would do it, and it never felt good. So it was through the novel I wanted her to grow while encountering all these kind of interesting, odd, sometimes awful characters, where she would slowly learn that, yes, it sucked that she didn't get that as a child, but now she just had to do that for herself. So yeah, that was sort of how the whole concept of it came together. And I wrote Astra jumping all over time, all over the place. Many of the chapters I rewrote in other people's perspectives, like how I mentioned that second short story that I never finished was written from Freedom's perspective. I actually wrote it many times in his perspective and then threw that away and made it from Clodagh, his mother's eyes later on. So there was many different shapes, and I moved people around and decided when they were going to talk and when it was their turn for their story. And then while doing that, I started to feel sort of bad for Astra and the fact that she hadn't got to share what she thought. Not that I wanted her to rebut the story or argue against what people were saying, but that I wanted her to have a voice, because that was partly the novel's point, was that she hadn't really had one, that she was looking for her voice through other people. So because Sarah mentioned that I could read a little bit and that everybody had read some, I have to take this opportunity, because I've never gotten to do this before, because usually I'm reading to people who haven't read the book yet. I'm going to read a very small part from Astra's section, because I haven't gotten to do that before. The following Saturday, I invite Justin over for a drink after dinner. Before he comes, I light the fire pit and dish out the terrible pie that I made earlier on the propane stove. It's a failure, but this doesn't seem like the kind of thing Justin will be fussed about. I'll make another when I have a proper oven, and I'll invite him again. Sitting beside Justin on Raymond's chairs, I can't help but think how it felt to be with other men in the past, how tense it could be. For years, I was desperate to please everyone, and it was exhausting. But with Justin, it isn't like that. He simply sits and tells me about his day when I ask. He tells me about a phone call he had with his brother, and he describes the plot of a movie he watched the evening before. But maybe this ease is because we're older now. Maybe it's because he's already had a wife and an entire life before. What could he possibly want from me? I think briefly about my phone in the camper, about all the voicemails Hugo has left over the last few weeks that I haven't answered. I think of the cute videos my granddaughter Eloise has been sending too. Hugo accused me of being a poor communicator in his most recent text, which is true. I only send a word or two in return so he won't worry I've died. I simply can't bring myself to talk to him or tell him why I haven't returned home to Vancouver yet. Tomorrow, I think. Tomorrow I'll call and tell him everything. Did you visit Raymond today? Justin asks after refilling both of our wine glasses and placing the bottle at his feet. Yes, I had lunch with him actually. And did you tell him about your plan? No, I grumble a little sheepishly. But you still want to tell him? I think so. It's just that now I've started to worry it's not for the right reasons. What are the right reasons? Permission, blessings. And what are the wrong reasons? I smile and raise my eyebrows. To make him mad, I say. Because it's true. I'm still stuck on that image of how I'm a rock and Raymond is the river. All I've ever wanted is to cause a little ripple in his life, to catch his attention for a moment. And I know that this is partially why I'm going ahead with my plans, why I've decided to stay. I want to be my own storm. I want to be a hurricane. I want to whip up the water's surface and make waves, even if he never sees it. I want the sun. Do you think that's sort of childish? I ask now. Maybe. Your dad is old, Astra. He probably won't have a clue what you're talking about, let alone get mad. Justin takes a sip of his wine, then he cups the glass delicately between his large hands. But I do understand what you're going through, he continues. How do you understand? I say, much too shortly. I'm finding myself all upset all of a sudden, and I'm worried that whatever he's about to say is going to hit me harder than I like. He runs his fingers through his beard. I've lost a lot of people in my life, he says. Too many. But there's one thing I know for certain. Do you want to hear it? I both want and don't want him to continue, but my long silence gives him permission to go ahead. I found that it's much harder to lose the people who never gave you enough than it is to lose the ones who gave you everything, he says. So yeah, I wanted to give Astra one last voice, one last chance to talk, but I didn't want her to rebut the story. I grew up, one final theme I'll talk about to finish up is that because I grew up in a small town where gossip is pretty important, that was another thing I wanted to explore while writing Astra, the effect that it has on people to be talked about, to have people speak for you, to misunderstand one another, to make judgments on one another. And while writing Astra, I wanted to give her that voice at the end, but I also often thought, would she be mad about this book? If somebody handed her the book and she read it, and she read what these people were saying about her, how would she feel? Some of them would she have forgotten about? Would some of them, would she be like, that story was entirely not true, that's not how it happened? So the whole while I was sort of having a conversation with her about these chapters and these stories that people were telling about her. So yeah, that's a little bit about how it all came together.
Well, that was fantastic. Thank you very much, Astra. And I'm glad you chose that passage to read because it is actually one of my most favorite passages. And I read it to my mom last night. I said, you got to hear this. And, because my mom and dad are, I think, listening in tonight. And she goes, wow. I mean, I know my mom hasn't read the book. I already read her that passage. And she's like, wow, that is powerful. So beautiful, beautiful, beautiful words, Astra. So now we'll move on to some of the submitted questions. And obviously, one that came up an awful lot was, who is Astra? And obviously, the Astra as a young lady is definitely you. But was there anybody later in life, as Astra grew a little bit older and got a little bit not more settled, but after she's had Hugo and she's moved on from Doris, is there a character or someone in your life that you modeled Astra off of, or is Astra just someone that she just grew as a character from writing out of you?
Yeah, well, I like to think of Astra. I mean, I definitely had some similarities to our upbringing a little bit, but not that many. And her life is definitely not my life, except for putting her in Calgary. We are very, very different people. Um, but I like to think that she's sort of 5% of me. The directionlessness, her sort of risk taking, her taking her time figuring out who she is and who her voice is, that I relate to. And then she sort of purely just kind of came. I mean, I've met many, many women, especially who grew up in kind of counterculture environments, some from Galliano that I grew up with, and some that I met long afterwards. We'd sort of always be drawn to each other and ask each other lots of questions about our childhoods. And so she's slightly modeled after just all of the young women and women that I knew who kind of grew up in this way of having some sort of admiration for their past and their parenthood and how different things were, but then also some difficulties with the things that they weren't taught and how they struggled to move on and to make connections and to kind of connect with the rest of the world afterwards. Yeah, so no, she's not based on any one person in particular, but sort of general themes of children that I know who kind of lived in that way.
So then a follow-up that sort of leads into this is what kind of research, apart from talking to friends and people in a similar situation, and what kind of research conditions and states of affairs of communes at the time? How did you come across that information? Because I mean, where you lived in Galliano Island, was it anything like the commune Celestial at all? Or were there similarities to your upbringing as to what, and how did you research communes? Or was it just literally from your sort of your experience?
It was a mixture. I like I said, when we moved to Galliano, we did live, without power and in tents while my parents built a small cabin. So I can imagine that. I knew how it was to use outhouses for years and to have showers with buckets of water dumped over your head. I knew about all of that sort of stuff. And then so many of my friends too, their parents were a little bit more nomadic, possibly living in various places around the island. Um, I made Astra 10 years older than me. She's born in 1970 when I was born in 1980. And I definitely consider myself having been born on the very tail end of sort of this type of parenting and this sort of culture. But I did grow up around a lot of people who had, spent half their lives on Galliano, half the year in Galliano and half the year in a treehouse in Goa, or they had were homeschooled and lived without power and made all of their own food and grew all their own food. So you would see little windows into people's lives. Nobody was living in communes anymore where I was growing up, but my parents were very political and they lived in communes in Vancouver before I was born. It was sort of just always around me and always interested me. And in my 20s, during a lot of my trying different things, I did for a long time think that I might want to make radio documentaries. This is, pre-podcasts. And I did a lot of reading on and essays and books on children that grew up in some of the bigger communes in the States. And I took tons of notes on it. And I watched every documentary and read every book that I could and every memoir. I was sort of obsessed for a period of time. So then when I just decided to try to write my first short story, it kind of just came out, but it had been years of interest and my upbringing and this research I had done a few years earlier that kind of all came together. And then, sorry, one more thing. I loved inventing a place that was celestial, that was Astra's place, that had its failures, its own complexities. That's one thing through all the reading I did, is that each of these communes, each of these types of farming communities were all very different. There was maybe similar problems that ended up happening over the years there, but I had room to invent an entire place that I had never seen before. And that was really fun.
Okay, because that was one of the questions, was Celestial a place? Was there a part in Galliano Island that you would go to that you envisaged was celestial? So no, so that was something you just made up on your own.
Yeah.
Definitely kind of fun.
Yeah.
So this lady Lynn came in. She said, yet another amazing choice with regards to the book. I especially enjoyed the creative and unique literary approach of uncovering the dynamic complexity of the protagonist through the lens of many equally intriguing characters. So part one question, I'm going to interject in this. Do you have another favorite character that you wrote aside from Astra? Were any of the other characters in there that one that you really loved writing? Was it Raymond or was it Brendan?
Doris.
Doris, okay.
Doris. Brendan was actually very fun to write because I felt like he was such a tricky character, and he was interesting to write to try to get into his headspace, and I quite enjoyed writing a lot of the different characters, obviously. But Doris is sort of just very special to me because I feel like she was sort of the heart, sort of the mother of the entire book. I mean, she's a little bit disgruntled and jaded and has trouble connecting honestly with Astra, but she still is the warmest and most caring and the one who protected Astra for so long. So she definitely, as soon as I got to write her chapter, I was so happy to write it. And every time I edited, I was like, yay, I'm back with Doris again. So she has a special place in my heart for sure.
Yeah, well, she certainly had her own secrets and, just, she wanted Raymond and obviously Astra to, it comes, the warmth of her character definitely comes through on the pages. So this is the question of the young lady who said that she thought you had a lot of intriguing characters. Her question is, what does she feel? So this is you. What do you feel is the best way that society, the government, the education system, and social services can best support children such as Astra and their families so that no children are forgotten and lost in the huge crack in our system, as sadly many children continue to still be left behind, particularly in Indigenous, racialized, and economically poor communities. So is there anything?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. I mean, guaranteed annual income would be one where no children, there could be absolutely no excuse for any child poverty, would definitely be number one for sure, because your reader is totally correct here. This was a large theme in the book that I didn't touch. I almost didn't bring it up because it's sort of too big. But the women that I saw growing up were often Cloda's character was very important to me because she was an example of somebody who had just been completely left behind. She was left with children that she had no support with and no money. And every time she found someplace to live, and she probably paid money and paid rent into that house or invested in it, then when things went wrong, she left and she was penniless again. And all she had was her van and her children that she had to take care of with no supports. And in the 70s and 80s, there were less supports than there are now, even though now there are nowhere near enough for any parent. So that was really important for me to get across, that in this counterculture movement, with this idea of everybody being free and free love, and we don't have to have responsibilities and marriage, and it doesn't matter who you love and who you live with. Great ideas on a whole, but it meant for a time a lot of women got really kind of run over in their own way. So yeah, guaranteed annual income would be number one to fix that across multiple communities, but there's also much more that can be done to free childcare, all these things that would be supports that slowly it seems like people are working towards, but of course never fast enough.
Yeah. All right, super. So another question that's come in is on page 139. Doris noticed that Astra doesn't seem to have a type of person that she's drawn to, that she links up with anyone who gives her attention. That's when Doris finally understood how truly vast and deep the hole in the girl's the hole in the girl really was. Astra was going to fill it with anything or anyone. And yet by the end of the book, when she gives Hugo some space and when she moves back to Celestial, it seems like she is more comfortable with herself. How do you think this transition happened in her?
Well, I think that Doris was both right and wrong when she said that Astra was filling it with a hole, because I do think Astra was very open to loving kind of anybody who she was interested in and who was good to her for a time. And so she would come home with anybody. She wasn't very judgmental of a person. But Doris saw this another side to this as well, which was that I think Doris didn't like a lot of the people that Astra brought home. So she also saw it negatively. So she was right that there was holes in Astra, and Astra was hoping that a person would fix it. But I think that Astra's exploration of different people that she spent time with wasn't bad as well. But then, yes, I agree that when she is in towards the end of the book, she looks at Justin, her neighbor. She doesn't know what she wants from him, and she sees that he probably doesn't want anything from her. And I do think that that is a big growth in her character, where she can just like a person for being a person, and she doesn't have to overthink it. And I do like that was a huge part of her growth that I wanted to have happen, that she would have more control and more understanding on who she was picking and why. Also with Nick, her partner for a period of time, she was actually trying with him. She wanted it to work. He was being somewhat controlling, but she was kind of fighting him on it. And so I kind of liked that beside Justin, where he seemed pretty laid back and she seemed to be in control. So that was definitely a growth that I worked on for her.
Wonderful. Now, sort of jumping in this, moving to Celestial, Hugo seemed to consume Astra's life after he was born. And obviously her not wanting to give him a lot of space himself was because she herself didn't have a mother figure. And I think this is how I read into it, that she almost smothered him because she wasn't smothered herself. But then at the very end, she's like ignoring the emails and not replying, and maybe tomorrow. Why the about face? Because from Hugo having her in his life the whole time, and then to almost stop the communication, it just, what is she hoping for Hugo, I guess you could say?
Well, yeah, I found the progression of their relationship really interesting. So yes, you're right. I agree that she always had wanted somebody who she was very, very close to. Even in chapter 2, when she's with Kimmy, she wants a very intense relationship and friendship. She tends to have these very intense relationships with people over and over and over again, some of which get her into trouble, some of which she decides eventually she doesn't want to be involved with anymore. And then with Hugo was a permanence, like he would be there with her forever. So that built over years and through different stages of her parenting. But then it was Hugo who pushed her away first and taught her in Dom's chapter that he couldn't have her be this close. And he was the one who first said no. And I was really proud of him for that. But he was also freeing her, I think, for the first time to consider herself finally as separate from him. And we get a little picture of that, the small changes she's made in Doris's apartment when he visits her in his section, and she's renovated the kitchen, and the house is now clean, and she's making pottery. She's moved past him a little bit. And I think that she was, how I saw it in Astra's chapter is that in that moment, when she was making that decision to stay at Celestial Farm and to take over and to she was taking care of Raymond, she just wasn't ready to tell Hugo. I saw in my head that they had grown back close together, but more at a reasonable push and pull, like a kind of a more healthy relationship between the two of them. But in that moment, she needed to own that time and space to make this decision for herself. So she was just comfortable not replying to him right away, not to jump up and return his texts and his emails, and that she would tell him and he'd start visiting. That was kind of how I saw it to myself. So it was at a healthy, I'll get back to him later because now it's time for me to think about myself.
Wonderful. Okay, so again, continuing a little bit on with the ending, did you know the ending, how the ending was going to be before you started it? Or were you like, did you in your writer's mind knew you were going to finish with Astra trying to tie it all together, not tie it all together, but conclude it? Or did that finishing with Astra, I know you talked about wanting to give her say, but did you know you were going to do that before you started writing your novel, or did that just come as you were writing your novel?
Yeah, I wanted there to be a full circle. a full circle with Raymond, because she does spend most of her life away from him and not connected to him at all. So, and he opens the book, and his initial thoughts and feelings about her right in that first chapter kind of lay the groundwork of kind of some struggles that she goes through. So for her going home and kind of reconciling with that for real for the first time, that was something I knew I wanted to do from the beginning. And also I do love a return home. I mean, I've done it. I've gone away for periods of time and then ended up building a place on Galliano and living there again when my kids were small. Like not everybody does it, but I think there's a point in your life where you are comfortable with going back and being a different person and sharing that with your community or the people who knew you. And that feels good when maybe there is a period of time in the middle where it isn't quite the right time. So yes, I always wanted her to go back and to kind of take over for herself, but also for Doris, sort of in her memory, because Doris had been really the only reason why Celestial existed at all. And she never got to actually make it into something she wanted, which eventually she just wanted it for Astra. So it was kind of for the both of them.
Well, it's funny you say the full circle, because after I finished the chapter with Raymond, I went back at the very end and I went back and read Raymond's chapter over again, because I thought, because he talked about his mother and the mother giving him the dice, and Astra all along with this dice thought it was her mother's. So anyway, one other question that came in is, throughout the book, the characters rely on the roll of a dice to help them decide what to do. And on page 247, Hugo mentions that Astra was always looking for signs in red skies, black cats, tea leaves, and more. Why is the role of chance so important to Astra?
Well, I think it was the only, Clodagh says that at one point she says it's maybe the only gift that Raymond had ever given her. It's sort of the only tool of parenting he has. I feel like when he taught her how to use the dice, he was offloading his the occasional times he wanted to give her advice, he was pretending it was happening in the dice, but really he was sort of controlling it. But yet as kids, I think we can believe in what we're told. And he was a fairly charismatic and convincing person. And I think she fully believed that the dice did work. I think it was her belief system that she was taught. And even though it sounds kind of silly, it was literally the only bit of parenting and the only solid thing. And it was actually a physical thing that she managed to not lose and keep her whole life. So she needed it as she went on. And only later did she realize that really she started using it the same way that Raymond had used it. Obviously she was going to not marry, she was going to say no to her marriage if she got the wrong number. Like she was using it as a crutch the whole time. Yeah.
And I thought the ending was brilliant. She does one last roll and doesn't look at what it says. So I thought that was very, very clever. So really all right. One other question that came in is, do you have another book in the works? Are you maybe going to develop one of the other characters you've already written into a novel, or are you just going to take off on a totally different direction and write something else? I know this book came out sort of during the pandemic, so I know you haven't had all the whirlwind tours that go along with the release of a book. So I don't know if you feel you've still got, Astra still has a lot more time, or if you've actually started to pen something else.
Yeah, I have been working on something. It was an idea that I've kind of had for years that I've been taking notes on, and during the pauses and lulls in editing process, I had already started. So I've already been working on another novel for a few years, and I've gotten quite deep in it now again. So now that the Astra stuff is slowing down a little bit, I hope to work as much as possible over the winter. And it's nothing to do with Astra. It is a completely different novel about two families in the 50s and 60s.
Oh, wonderful. So quite a bit of research to go there. So
yes, that book has required a lot of research, and there is a lot more. Every time I work on it, I'm listing more things I need to, yes. So it's a very different it's not drawing on any of my experience or any of my geographical paths. It is, yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Now, quick question. Your husband is also an author, and I loved his book as well, Greenwood. And it's Michael Christie. If you don't know who Cedar's husband is, how is it living with another writer in the house? Do you bounce things off of each other, or do you just go to your separate writing rooms and leave it be, or is there synergies? It's because it's funny because Michael's book was kind of a full circle with the rings of the tree. Yours comes full circle with the characters. I just wasn't sure if that's something you discussed or whether it just came about. So just
Yeah,
curious.
no, I never thought about that similarity because they are such different books, but you're right. I guess that is, they both do come full circles. His probably even more so because it goes
Yes.
right through. But yeah, no, it is obviously very nice to share something that you love so much with your best friend and the person who's puttering around the house with you the whole time. We, because it is our main interest, both of us, we talk about books or about writing or about where we're stuck, or just like over lunch when we're both home working, we will just start talking about, oh, I'm struggling with this, or I'm reading this book to try to fix this problem. And then but we try, it's been a long process. So Mike has 3 books now. And so I've always read, I've been his first reader through all the books. Was part of my building the courage to become a writer, is I realized how much I absolutely loved to think about structure and character and to pick apart writing in such a way. Part of that was like, because I didn't go to school for writing, I didn't go to university and study it, I actually got a lot out of watching Mike and seeing how he wrote and seeing how he solved problems, and just seeing how much time and energy and research and reading it takes to write a novel. I saw it happening in my house. My mom's also a writer too, so I saw it through my childhood as well. So I'd always kind of watched writers do it. I just didn't know I was going to try it myself. But it is really helpful to have somebody there that you can, I think it's sort of similar. A lot of people are in writers groups, or they have a few people that are their close readers that they will go to if they have a problem or they want to discuss something. I just have that now with Mike in my house whenever we need it. So it's like, it is a huge blessing. I don't know if I would have ever gotten the courage to try if I didn't have him there. But we don't share the details until we are actually ready. Like, here is a fully completed draft of my manuscript that I'd like a reader for before I send it off to my agent or something like that. We just talk about the problem's broad picture rather than in the details.
There you go. Now, do you do a lot of reading on your own? I know you also, I didn't say in the introduction, you also have I don't know, is it a full-time or a part-time job that you work for the University of Victoria, transcribing? You want to give us a little bit of that background and how you came to doing that job?
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's for the Canadian Institute of Substance Use Research, which is up at UVic, and I transcribe. So as I've already mentioned earlier, I love to listen to things, and I don't do any of the research myself, but all the people go out and talk to people in the community about safe supply, substance use, the various topics about and hard to house people, and they interview tons of people all over the city and all over Vancouver, and try to get research to help move governments into various directions. And I type it all out. So it's like the easy part of the job. I just listen to people talk and I just type it all out, and it's really lovely and a good way to be a part and to kind of know my community better. So I love that job. I went a bit less during COVID because all of it's confidential and I have to go up to UBC, so that was closed down for a while. And now I'm just doing it part-time. I'll do a contract work, I'll go up and do that for a while, and then I stay home and write. So it balances very, very well with my new writing life, though it is still just typing in front of a computer. So it's not that much different in that way.
So how did you get into that stream?
I had a friend who works up there for the organization, and I met her through my kids. And when we first moved to Victoria, and she knew I could type, and I said I could type real fast. And so she hired me. That's basically it.
That's great. Well, good for you. You're doing great work. So again, with all that and doing your writing, is there time for reading? Like, are you a voracious reader? And, what are you reading right now? And then I've got one other final sort of question, and then I'll be handing it over to Maya for the little finale.
Okay. Yes, I read all the time. I mean, every night for sure. Also, when I get stuck, I always have a stack of books that I'm reading that are like to do with the project that I'm working on right now. And then I also have what I read for fun or for just inspiration. What have I read? I've read Fight Night. I just finished Great Circle. I'm about to start Bewilderment. So yeah, my
All
stack
the
is always
award
much
winners.
bigger. Yeah, I'm on the awards kick. Yeah, exactly. But I've also really enjoyed the list this year. So it's been quite fun to, yeah, I just can't help myself. I go out and buy all the books and I read them all when they come out.
That is great. So, okay. And then just before, I was going to say, you sent a letter to independent bookstores when Astra was still in its infancy. And you say each novel contains a unique and imagined world. You dive in, meet the folks who inhabit the pages, and soon you're eavesdropping on the intimate details of their lives. So I just thought that was extremely powerful. And you certainly let us get into the intimate lives of Astra and the circle of friends around her. And we're just beyond thankful that you have written it, because it's really given us a lot of food for thought. And as I said, we really, 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 really wanted it on the short list, and we really, really, really wanted it to win, because it is an absolutely fabulous, fabulous book. It does everything that I think a Giller Award winner should do. I mean, like we said at the beginning, it's got great characters. It's just, it challenges you as it challenges the reader and everything else. So like I said, very disappointed that you're not going to be getting all dolled up for the Gillers, but you are a Giller winner. So I just want to say thank you very much for such a wonderful evening and all your insights into Astra and the writing process and into your personal life as well. So thank you very, very much. And now I'm going to pass it over to Amaya, and I guess we'll open up the chat for the thank yous and everything else. So thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. That was lovely.
It was great. Thank you.
Cedar, it's my privilege to just offer you a blessing in your work, to know how your work has been received as a blessing for us this night. But there's a sacredness about Galliano, about the place where the land you call home right now, in raising your little ones into ones who will have a voice in the world, into the way you've described for us how you continue to learn and grow. I pray that you have chances to speak your wisdom beyond the page for even tonight, just the boldness and the courage. I'm proud to be part of a community that is also speaking in the places for children and families to be cared for. So just know that as you write and your words are sent out into the world, we've been blessed by you tonight, and may you continue to be blessed in this next season of writing.
Thank you very much. And same back to you. Thank you for having me.
And let these waterfall of gratitudes in the chat, just of people who've been blessed by your work tonight.
Thank you very much. Thank you, and bless you all too.
Thanks, everybody.
Stay
tuned for what's next. What a gift. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you very much, everybody, for all your wonderful questions and for having me.
Yeah. Thanks, Cedar. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.